Whenever I've looked through the watches that have been on offer from Yema, it is the NavyGraf Heritage, this watch here, that has always stood out to me the most. Hello, you're watching James. My name's James, you're watching me, and I am talking about watches, and I'm back talking about a Yema. Now previously I owned a Rallygraph from Yema and I really liked it. I liked the look of it, the quality of it, and how it sat on wrist. So when I owned that watch, when I was enjoying that watch, it made me want to look a little bit deeper into the brand to see if they had any other watches that captured my attention. And certainly this NavyGraf, this Heritage NavyGraf, is the watch that grabbed my attention the most. Now, unfortunately, this is not a current watch from them. They have superseded it with some other options which also look quite good, but it's this one that keeps grabbing my attention. But there are a lot of them out there on the used market, and in fact, I bought this one myself used, and looking out there, they sort of seem to range between about 600 to 800 Australian dollars. And at 600 to 800 Australian dollars, I think there is some value there because this is a good looking watch, a well-made watch, an interesting watch with an in-house caliber, and it might be one that you end up wearing a lot. So if you are going to go on the hunt to buy one of these for yourself, there are plenty of options available, but of course always be careful when you're buying used because you will need to find the one at the right price for you, but it also needs to be the right quality, it needs to be the right condition, it needs to be the right one for you. So if you're going to do that, just take your time and find the right one that fits in with you with all the points that you need for you. But let me show you this watch in a little bit more detail, which may sort of convince you or possibly convince you not to buy this one. So let's flip the camera. Let's check out my Yema NavyGraf Heritage. Now, having owned this NavyGraf Heritage for the last few months, there are a couple of things that have really stood out to me in that time. Firstly is actually how often I've been reaching for this one. This is a watch that I just happen to grab all the time. I've got lots of watches in my collection, obviously, but this one here just tends to be a watch that I grab because I just quite like wearing it. And that's probably the second thing that has really stood out to me about this one over the last few months of wearing it, is just how nice it is to wear on wrist, which probably is one of the reasons why I've been grabbing it so often. And that's definitely probably part to the dimensions of this watch, because the case of this one here is actually 38.5, but the bezel does stick out a little bit more, making it 39 millimeters. The width of the watch is 12.2 millimeters. The lug to lug is 46.8 millimeters, but you do see that the sort of the downward sort of curvature of those links there do end up sticking out a little bit, but it doesn't really affect how it wears on wrist. The lug width is 20 millimeters. There is a bit of a taper though, which partly also makes it feel nice on wrist, down to about 16 millimeters. And size to my 17 centimeter wrist, it is 128 grams. And the other reason I think I've been reaching for this one is definitely the looks, because it has a really nice, clean, crisp look to it, easy to read, and just a really nice watch to look down at. It has a matte black dial there. Printing on it, everything sort of is printed on. The Yema logo, NavyGraf, 990 feet automatic, patent pending in white. Then those little minute markers, they're also white. The hour markers, however, they're in this sort of faux Tina sort of look, which gives it a little bit more of that sort of vintage vibe, because there are some vintage vibes to this watch. But then there's that surprise of the yellow on the hands, the minute, the hour, and the second. Really bright, and I quite like yellow on hands and on watches because it gives it a little bit of something. And the other part, you'll see at the base of those sort of hands there, colored black. So you end up almost with this sort of floating hand effect, which is quite cool. There's also some lume on there, and it's quite interesting. It's a little bit different, but I quite like it, and it's been okay. I wouldn't say that this is the best lume I've seen on a watch, but I've certainly been okay with the lume on it. That whole dial there is covered by a flat piece of sapphire crystal, and I'm pretty sure there's a bit of AR coating there because it is quite easy to see through it even in direct light. Now, the bezel insert that surrounds this one, it is shiny. I'm not actually sure exactly what it is, but it appears to be a sapphire bezel insert. If it's not, well, it certainly looks a lot like it. You can see there it's sort of shining just like the sapphire crystal that's covering that dial. There is a corn edge bezel with a section underneath, so it sits up rather high, which sort of adds to that sort of vintage look. And it is a 90-click unidirectional. Has a really nice action, but I'm not sure why they decided to go with 90-click. Yeah, that's an interesting decision by Yema. Now, everything on this watch is all brushed. It has a really sort of tool sort of feeling to it. So you'll see under that bezel, under that little sort of section there, that's brushed. brushed sides of the case. You can see it has drilled end lugs there and a fully guarded crown. The end of the crown is polished with the Yema Y. It is screwed down, giving you that 990 feet of water resistance. Does have hand winding. Now, being an in-house caliber Yema movement, it has something a little bit surprising. Not in a good way, unfortunately. It has a ghost position. I'm not sure why it has a ghost position, because, well, it's an in-house caliber. Why not make a watch movement specific for this watch? But that's what they've gone with. But when you do take it out to the full position, you can see it also has hacking. Now, being an in-house caliber Yema, I think there's a bit of debate about exactly what that movement is. But no matter what it is, I'd be interested to see what it is like and how it is performing on my time grapher. So whenever you buy a used watch, you never quite know how it's been treated and as a result, how it is going to be performing. These figures are okay, except for the rate. The rate's probably higher than I'd be comfortable with normally on a watch, but it's something which I can probably look at sort of adjusting myself because it's running almost 40 seconds fast per day. But it is a high beat movement, 28,800 vibrations per hour. Beat error is okay, it's within a range that is okay. Amplitude, again, it's okay, it's within a range that is okay. So it's not fantastic, especially with that rate, but overall, it's okay, and it seems to appear relatively healthy, which is probably the most important thing when buying a used watch. As I mentioned, the case is all brushed, which also leads into an all brushed bracelet, which tapers from 20 down to 16, which really adds to that on-wrist experience. It is a H-link, solid, with solid end links, but it does sit a little bit funny because it sort of grabs a little bit. Doesn't actually affect the on-wrist experience very much because it is curving down a lot though. Held together with split pins, has a sort of a nice enough clasp, probably not my favorite though because it is that friction lock here. Friction, which always grabs onto my fingers there, but it's all milled, which is not too bad. I think it's nice, and it is relatively small because it is coming down from that 16 millimeters of taper. Plenty of micro adjust there, and it does have a diver's extension in here too, and it's quite a good diver's extension. It has a solid case back, as you can see, a couple of different textures there with the Yema sort of coat of arms there, which I actually quite like. But as I've mentioned already a few times, it's the on-wrist experience that really has grabbed me with this one. I think it looks great on wrist, fits great on wrist, and is really comfortable. You can see it does hover a little bit above the wrist there. This sort of style tends to do that, but it's not something that you notice when you're actually wearing the watch. That taper, I think, also adds to that sort of experience. I think that's why people like taper on bracelets, but also the weight, the style, and the size. So what do I like about this one? What don't I like about it? And what would I change? Well, firstly, it is the sort of ease of wear that I like the most. It is a nice on-wrist experience that is also comfortable. The size I like, the looks I also like. Don't really like that it has a ghost position, especially when it's meant to be an in-house caliber. The whole point of being a little bit more fancy, a little bit more interesting, a little bit more special than an off-the-shelf movement is that you pick a movement that suits the watch perfectly. And it doesn't fit the watch perfectly because there is no date on this particular watch. Also, I just don't understand why they've chosen to go with a 90-click bezel. When would you actually use a 90-click bezel? I go scuba diving, I'm a diver, I've been diving for most of my life, and I can't think of a reason why you'd have a 90-click bezel. So I definitely changed those two things about it, and I guess if I was going to be sort of a bit pedantic about it, it'd be nice to have screw links. That's always a nice sort of feature. And this style, this friction locker clasp is never going to be my favorite. This one's actually not too bad. It doesn't rip your fingernail off when you are taking it off your wrist or trying to open it up out of your watch box, but I'd always sort of prefer sort of the push buttons ones. I do prefer those style. But overall, it is a really nice watch that I have been wearing a lot. And if you can find one of these at the right price, I think it is well worth considering because it is a really nice watch, but a little bit different as well, a little bit of a sort of a vintage vibe to it from a company which is a little bit different to some of the more standard watches that people tend to be buying. So worthwhile considering. And whilst you're considering that, maybe you want to check these videos out next.